Hi everyone, welcome to week 2, video 1 of the Wittgenstein course. So last week we were just doing some very introductory stuff. The idea last week was just to get everyone to kind of see exactly what questions Wittgenstein is interested in and precisely why he was interested in those particular questions. And if you recall, those questions were questions like, what does logical truth consist in? What's the difference between a logical truth and some other kind of truth, an empirical truth or a contingent truth, or a metaphysical truth? So what does logical truth consist in, and what's the difference between logical truth and some other kinds of truth? Another question that Wittgenstein was very interested in, related question, is what do so-called logical expressions really mean? Or how do they come to be meaningful? And this, in turn, led Wittgenstein into a much more general inquiry into meaning. What is meaning? What is it for a sentence to be meaningful? Or how is meaning possible? Because Wittgenstein thought that if you could answer the general question about meaning, it's bound to shed light on these more specific questions about the meaning of logical expressions and the truth of logical truths. So this week we are going to get stuck in much more to the actual text. In session, we're going to go through it quite forensically and look at what Wittgenstein actually had to say. And the topic really for this week is the relationship between Wittgenstein's understanding of the meaning of the word not and how this understanding of the meaning of the word not led him to the picture theory of propositions. So Wittgenstein starts with some questions, comes up with some answers, all relating to the question of how does the word not come to be meaningful. And the answers that he provides there leads him to the picture theory of propositions. So in this first video, all I want to do is to sketch out what kind of understanding of the word not Wittgenstein wasn't happy with. And in the next video, we're going to look at why he wasn't happy with that particular understanding of the word not. And then we'll see what his alternative view was and how it led him to the view that propositions are pictures. So the word not is a short word and a word that doesn't often give us much trouble in ordinary life. But for philosophers and logicians, I think it's one of the most important words around. And its meaning has been a contentious issue since time immemorial. So let's look first at a particular understanding of the meaning of the word not, to which Wittgenstein was opposed. So, well, one of the first things to say is I think what Wittgenstein has in mind here is Bertrand Russell's understanding of the word not. Okay? He alludes to this in several entries of the Tractatus and in his notebooks. We're not going to get into the question of how accurate Wittgenstein's view was, that Russell did hold this view. We're sort of going to assume that someone held this view. And if you really want to know who Wittgenstein had in mind, I think that we can pretty firmly say it was Russell. So what was Russell's, or Russell's, understanding of the meaning of the word not? Or what understanding of the word not does Wittgenstein not like? Whether or not Russell actually held to this view or not is not our primary concern. Well, let's start with a basic relation that's asserted by philosophers of language and logicians, generally speaking. So this is the notion of reference. In the philosophy of language, the relation of reference is the relation a word has to some object out there in the world, the thing that it refers to. And the referent of an expression is often identified with its meaning. We can call the referent of a name the meaning of the name, right? And the referent, for instance, of the word Ollie, or particularly Ollie Spinning, is me, the actual thing in the world that's speaking now, the physical thing. And we can extend this out to all kinds of words, not just nouns. We can have verbs, may have reference. So the relation of speaking might be the referent of the word speaking, right? So we can have abstract reference as well as concrete reference. That takes us into metaphysics. But the basic idea is, and this is the idea that Russell and Wittgenstein both agreed with, is that at a certain level, there is a relationship between language and the world, and that relationship is one of reference. So I've already said that the word name, Ollie, has as a referent me. The word London has as a referent the city, the place that you can actually walk around in. And the view of the word not that Wittgenstein is opposing is a view of the word not, according to which the word not has a referent. Or more precisely, it's a view of the word not which attempts to explain how that word comes to be meaningful through a suggestion that it has a referent, that it refers. So we have all these words, Ollie, London, San Francisco. What do they mean? Well, they mean their referent. What's their referent? The thing out there in the world that they kind of pick out. What's the meaning of the word not? Well, this is the explanation that Wittgenstein doesn't like. Well, it's some other thing out there in the world. That's our basic understanding of how words have meaning. The word not has meaning, i.e. it's not gibberish. It's not just a completely insensible sort of nonsense string. It clearly affects the meaning of sentences in which it figures. So the answer goes, well, it must refer to something then. That's why the word Ollie is meaningful, because it refers to me. The word not is meaningful because it refers to some thing. So this is the view Wittgenstein doesn't like. And I suppose one of the first questions that you might want to ask is, what does it refer to? It's much more obvious in the case of Ollie or London what those things refer to, because they refer to concrete things which you can perceive with your senses, things which you can find and check that they exist, for instance. What does the word not refer to, according to the view that Wittgenstein doesn't like? I think that there's probably a few answers that you can give to this. I don't think it's altogether clear what it refers to, but whatever it refers to has to at least be abstract, not concrete, i.e. it doesn't exist in time and space. It's not a sort of physical entity which you can perform empirical tests to see if it exists, right? So it can't be like that. So it's got to be abstract. I think the idea is that it is potentially kind of Platonic universal, the Platonic not. That's what the word not refers to. Just as if you're a Platonist, you think the word red refers to a kind of universal redness. I think that on the view that Wittgenstein is opposing, the word not refers to some kind of abstract Platonic universal not. We might conceive of that thing as a property, like red, or it might be a relation which holds between things. I'm not completely sure. I mean, Wittgenstein doesn't say exactly what understanding of the referent of not he has an issue with, because, as we'll find out in the next videos, it doesn't matter how you characterize the referent of not. He doesn't like the idea that word refers at all. So he thinks, obviously he agrees that the word not is meaningful. No one would disagree with that. That's what he's trying to explain. That's what he's interested in. But he doesn't agree that it refers to anything. And I think the typical view is that it refers to something abstract. You'll see in the reading for this week written by Frank Ramsey, he refers to someone in particular called Chadwick, who holds that the word not refers to a relation, for instance. So that's one option. But as I say, it doesn't really matter what you think it refers to. Wittgenstein has an issue with its being a referring expression at all. So this week we're focusing on the word not, but Wittgenstein equally doesn't like the idea that any of the so-called logical constants refer. So Wittgenstein says, and this is in the reading, this is one of the passages of the Tractatus that I've asked you to read, he says, my fundamental thought is that the logical constants do not refer. And he says elsewhere we can see that there are no such things as logical objects. So we're going to focus on not for this week's purposes, but I think it's also true to say that he didn't think the word and referred to a kind of Platonic conjunction, some kind of relation out there. The phrase, if such and such, then such and such, he didn't think that refers to anything. He didn't think that any logical expressions are meaningful in virtue of having a referent. So he thought it was a kind of a naive model. It's naive to model the meaning of logical expressions on non-logical expressions, like ordinary names, proper names, nouns, etc. And the same goes for the so-called quantifier expressions, every x and some x. We don't need to get into the technical details too much, but I think in the tradition preceding Wittgenstein, those phrases were often held to refer to properties, in particular properties of properties, second-order properties. So he thought, again, it's an error to think that those phrases are meaningful because they refer to some kind of entity or object. Right, so that's it for this video, just to introduce you to the view that Wittgenstein is opposing. That the word not in particular, and all logical expressions in general, are meaningful in virtue of referring to something. Wittgenstein says it's an inadequate explanation of why those words are meaningful. In the next video, I want to discuss two specific criticisms that Wittgenstein makes of the view that the word not refers to an object. Okay, that's enough for this one. Cheers, guys.